Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Newell and I lead the Human Capital Management Product Marketing team here at Oracle. And today I'm here with Kara Capretta, Vice President of HCM Transformation at Oracle.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
We're here today to talk about human capital management and talent management leadership. We know that CEOs are thinking a lot about talent these days, and you have a lot of experience with executive leadership and talent. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Michelle, I worked at Nationwide Insurance for 13 years. I started out there as an HR generalist, and when I left, I led talent management at an enterprise level, and they're a Fortune 100 company. After that, I moved to the outside kind of commercial world in HR. I worked for a company called Lominger Limited, and they're one of the largest providers of competency-based products for human resources folks. I led that company and then eventually sold it to Korn Ferry. Korn is the largest executive recruiting firm in the world, and I was the VP of Strategy and Intellectual Property there for a number of years before I joined Oracle.
So can you tell me, right now we know that talent is the #1 agenda priority for CEOs. What is it that's changed with human resources to make this so important for them?
There are a few things happening right now. One is the shift in demographics, and most CEOs realize that they're going to lose up to 50% of their workforce in the next 10 years. So that creates a challenge for CEOs to get talent ready for new assignments and to find talent from the outside to really build their capacity. And there was a recent study that indicated that CEOs, about 25% of CEOs, said that they were unable to execute pressing business strategies because they didn't have the right talent to pull it off. So talent is really a big issue right now.
So they're finding that talent, the lack of talent, is actually getting in the way of achieving business results.
It is.
So what are the practices and what are the programs that HR themselves are going to take in order to meet the CEO's needs and priorities?
There are a few things happening right now. One is there's a greater emphasis on recruiting. Technology has changed recruiting significantly, so the way that people network to find jobs and the way that companies advertise and reach out to connect with potential employees has changed. Therefore, it's a major priority and a shift for organizations to figure out how to attract people, how to get them in the door. Another thing that's happening is because of the change in demographics, HR is charged with paying more attention to middle managers, and they're charged with paying attention to people earlier in their career and younger in their career runway. So we're digging deeper into organizations from a talent standpoint. The other thing is there's greater emphasis on performance management. So we realize that we need to give people more feedback sooner in their career, and teach managers how to do it on a regular basis so that people know where they stand and where they might be qualified for next opportunities.
So that's very interesting. I'm kind of curious though, because I understand that there's also a war for talent. We've heard that many, many times. And if recruiting is a priority, but you can't find the skilled talent outside of your company, what do you do with the internal talent in order to meet needs?
That's a great question. And organizations are getting more and more focused on the process that we call talent review. And it's basically using a 9-cell to categorize the way that they feel about an employee's performance and their potential. Utilization of the 9-cell not only helps to categorize or classify talent, but it also facilitates a process for leaders to talk about people in their organizations via peer review, with folks that they run organizations with, and with their HR partners. So utilizing the 9-cell is very important to figure out who we have in the organization and then ultimately what we do with them. Because one of the best practices is to learn how to develop talent differently based on how we classify them. So the developmental path for a high potential would be very different than the developmental path for a high professional.
Oh, what do you mean by that? What's the difference between a high performer and a high potential?
Okay, a high potential is someone that we believe has potential to do things outside of their functional technical silo, or we believe that they have general management potential. So in other words, somebody that you could see running a business operation, being a GM, maybe being a president or a CEO, somebody that can be promoted multiple times outside of what it is that they know and they do best. On the flip side, a high professional is a subject matter expert. They are the best in their domain, so they might be the best financial person that you have, the best IT person that you have, the best HR person that they have. They may be promotable within their function, but it's unlikely that they would do something out of that particular silo.
Okay, great. So what's different about talent review now? I know that we used to use lots of binders and have meetings in person in order to do these things. What's new? What's different?
Couple of things. One is technology has caught up with HR practices, and in many instances, it's further ahead of where some HR practitioners are. And so what's very exciting is that technology has given HR professionals freedom from some of the laborious and administrative things that they've been doing, like creating 9 cells in PowerPoint presentations and putting them in clunky binders. Now people are actually able to use technology in remote situations via a WebEx or a web meeting and move talent in real time and leverage data that exists in their system.
So once you've profiled the talent and you know who you have, what do you do next?
There are a couple of things to consider. One is, how do you want to develop them? Do you want to develop them to be more successful or to raise the performance bar in the current job that they have? Or are you really targeting development for a future job? And if that's the case, then it can lead you into a couple of additional directions. One is, you could compare people to each other. So if you're thinking about promoting someone to another job and you've got multiple people in the candidate pool, you might say, how does Joe compare to Craig? And do an analysis of those 2 people. To do that, you need to know what skills they're capable of. And so you really need to do a competency assessment of them so that you've got apples to apples. You're comparing business acumen to business acumen or strategic agility to strategic agility. So that's what we call a candidate comparison. Another thing that you can do is you can compare a person to a job profile. So you can say, how does Joe rank against these 12 competencies that are important for a job? So there are lots of interesting different paths you can take that are very focused on skills that are either important today or important in the future.
And how does that differ for top talent, the executive layer at the top?
Generally speaking, for top talent, you're looking at very executive level skills. You're also looking at them to run businesses. So in some instances, it's less about the particular competencies that they have, but more about have they had the right jobs and experiences. So one of the things that you do is you really profile their resume or their experience category. You might say, have they had a startup? Have they had a fix-it? Have they worked outside of their home country? Have they managed a crisis? Whatever the case may be, to really make sure that they've had a variety of rich experiences that are very much so predictive of executive success.
You just said one of my favorite words there, predictive. What do we do in order to figure out what was the right choice to make and see what's going to come from it?
Well, there's a lot of research that helps us to make smart decisions about people. So we can look at whether or not they've had those catalogs of experiences, the more the better. So the more variety of experiences with challenges, diversity, adverse uphill battles, the better. The other thing is we know which competencies in many instances are indicative of executive success. So we may want to look at those types of things as well to really predict whether or not we're putting our money on the right candidate.
Is there something that technology can do to help us with that?
Absolutely. When it comes to executive profiling, generally speaking, there's a smaller candidate that we're focused on, and the board of directors or the CEO knows those folks very well. On the flip side, most of the research and the trending says that we need to develop people sooner in their careers and earlier. That's where technology really comes into play. When you need to dig deep into the organization, below the director level, into the mid-management level, imagine you're a company the size of Oracle with 110,000 employees. You can't do this manually anymore. You need to really have technology to create a consistent process and really fill up the data that you need to make good decisions.
So we've talked about talent profile and succession planning. So how can mid-size or smaller companies than Oracle take advantage of technology?
That's a great question. The reality is, regardless of size, technology is going to enable HR and ultimately to improve productivity. So the technology that I'm talking about to facilitate the 9-cell is just as important for a smaller mid-sized company as a large company. You need it to have consistency in the data, consistency in the process, and access to people. So whether you've got 10,000 people or 110,000 people, if they're remote from you and not people that you see every day, and HR is dispersed all over the place, it's a way to come together and to connect.
So we've talked a lot about inputs such as competencies and skills for reviewing talent and determining succession. What about other inputs, for example, performance?
That's a great question, because performance is one of the primary inputs into the talent review process, or the 9-cell. So generally speaking, you'll have performance on one axis and you'll have potential on the other. One of the neat things that technology does to facilitate this process is that it can automatically input some information for that axis. So for instance, your last performance review on the 10 people that report to you can be the starting point for then how you talk about them in the talent review process.
Performance reviews aren't adopted all the time, 100% across a company. What is it that we can do to make sure that we get those reviews and ratings so that we can have that information?
Performance is really a laborious process from some folks' perspective. But the reality is, a positive way to look at it is it's a way for a boss or a manager to talk to their employees about what's important from a goal-setting standpoint, how it aligns with the business strategy, and ultimately how they're doing on their job and how they're contributing. So when we recognize that that's the primary purpose of the performance management process, it puts us in a different mindset. And it's not about the form. So the performance management process itself connects a lot of the dots via technology, whether it's competency profiling, the review process itself, input into the talent review or the 9-cell, then ultimately to succession planning. So it really starts to bring the entire employee life cycle together.
So if we think back to the CEO, he's got several inputs. He's got a lot of information coming in about recruits externally, about internal performance, internal profiles. How does this all come together to help meet that need and that concern for talent?
Couple of different ways. We can look at how all of that information impacts workforce planning. So we can say, how many people do we really need, or what types of jobs do we need for the future? And how does the current workforce stack up to that? Do we have the skills we need? Do we have the people we need? Do we have them in the right geographies, etc.? So we can look at it from that perspective. Another way that CEOs and leaders in organizations are really being influenced by technology and data is through predictive analytics. That really is one of the best and biggest things happening in HR right now. We've long talked about having data, running reports and analytics. Now we're in this stage called predictive analytics. So what that really means is that technology is able to help us do some really important things with predictive analytics. It's able to help us think through the consequences of some of the things that we do with folks. It's able to nudge us to do some very positive things. And ultimately, it's able to really flash a light in front of us and say, A plus B equals C, or could equal C, and what are you going to do with that information? If you don't give somebody a raise now, and you don't give them a promotion or an opportunity, or you keep them under the same boss for too long, there's a good chance that you might lose them. So it really helps to connect all the dots from the employee life cycle to HR practices to just good leadership overall.
Kara, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about talent management?
Talent management is really a hot topic, as you mentioned, for CEOs as well as for HR. And the other thing that's happening is that the role of HR itself is continuing to evolve. There's a recent research study that was published by Dave Ulrich and the RBL Group that says that HR needs to really be looking from the outside in. We need to be paying attention to what's happening outside of our own function and our own business so that we can have that perspective to add value. We need to be an integrator of HR practices so that they all talk to each other. And for the first time in HR, our profession is being told that we need to be a technology proponent. So technology is not just for the IT department anymore. It's for the HR professionals. And as a matter of fact, line executives in this study, and there were 5,000 line executives that participated, said that it's the most important thing that HR can do right now to add value to the business, is to better understand technology, better push it, and use it from a social mobile standpoint, as well as from a platform to integrate the workforce to the business and to get people performing better.
That's a great insight. Thank you so much for your time today, Kara.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today.